Chapter 26. After the first gunshot, they drove to the ground and pressed themselves flat. Then came two other shots, followed shortly by more. Nick was sure he had heard one of the bullets zing off a nearby tree. When the firing stopped, Twilly got up, pointing his own rifle. He was breathing hard, listening for human footfalls. Smoke was the next to stand, then Nick, then Marta, who was trembling badly. "Everyone okay?" Twilly asked. The kids nodded. Everyone was not okay. Mrs. Starch was still down. Her face was pale, her eyes looked glassy, and a crimson stain was blooming on the side of her canvas trousers. "Oh, no," said Twilly, and he put down the rifle and knelt beside her. Nick and Smoke helped turn her over while Marta stood back, sobbing softly. Twilly hurriedly cut away the bloody pant leg to examine the bullet wound, which was serious. Nick felt lightheaded and slightly sick. "She needs a doctor," he said. "Is she going to die?" Marta called tearfully. Mrs. Starch lifted her head. "No, dear, I'm not going to die." Her voice was weak but firm. "We're taking you to the hospital," Twilly said. There was no debate, no argument, because Mrs. Starch was a large person. Twilly and Dwayne Jr., the only two strongest in the group, would attempt to carry her back to the car. It would be a long, difficult haul through the marsh and the hammocks. Without asking, Twilly tore a strip of fabric off Smoke's shirt to make a pressure bandage. "We don't have much time. You're bleeding like crazy." "I'm aware of that," Mrs. Starch said. "Where's the kitten?" At that very moment, something swift and heavy burst from a nearby thicket. A tan, snarling streak then passed within arm's reach of the fallen teacher and her helpers, bounding to the top of the craggy, dead pine. "It's her," Smoke said. He gazed up with the purr of awe of the mother panther, which was panting hotly and still spooked from the gunfire. "Where's the kitten?" Mrs. Starch whispered again. Nick scanned the clearing and spotted the cub, frightened lump huddled on the bed of pine straw. "He's fine," Nick assured Mrs. Starch. "Can you handle him? It's all up to you now," she said. "You and Marta, we can do it." With a grim efficiency, Twilly worked on Mrs. Starch's leg to stanch the bleeding. Smoke kept his eyes glued on the panther in the tree while Nick and Marta watched the kitten to the ground. The two cats, mother and baby, remained unaware of each other. After a few minutes, Twilly hoisted Mrs. Starch to her feet and instructed her how to hold on. Smoke got to the other side, and together he and Twilly formed a human crutch. "If you hear someone coming," Twilly said to Nick and Marta, "take off running. If you can't get away, then use that." He nodded towards his rifle leaned against the stump. Nick had never fired a real gun. His father didn't own one, though he had become an expert marksman in the National Guard. Marta said, "I've shot a .22 before. My cousins in Miami took me to the target range." "This is different," Smoke told her, "way different." With his free hand, Twilly pulled the vulture beak necklace from his pocket and tossed it to Marta. "You're going to need all the mojo you can get," he said with a tight smile. Mrs. Starch was obviously in pain and fading. "Do your best," he told Nick and Marta, and the eyelids began to flutter. Twilly pulled Nick aside and said, "I'll be back as soon as I can. Don't get yourself lost." "We'll be right here." Then without another word, Twilly and Smoke set off grimly across the foggy flatlands. Mrs. Starch was propped limply between them, her feet dragging, an arm around each other on their shoulders. Smoke glanced back only once, with an anxious expression, and Nick waved. Marta put on Twilly's strange necklace and said, "You ready?" The fear was completely gone in her voice. "Let's do it," Nick said. The cub was still shaking from the noise of the gunfire when Nick scooped him up. There was no claw or biting. Little Squirt seemed almost relieved to be held, even by an unknown human. With the kitten curled against his chest, Nick stood beneath the tall dead pine trying to visualize the climb. He wanted to put the cub as close as possible to the mother cat who would loom away in a shadow high in the gnarled boughs. "What if it's the wrong panther?" Marta asked. "No," Smoke said, "it's her." "What if he made a mistake?" "He wouldn't," Nick said, and he didn't. "That's a nasty old tree. Don't break your neck." "Thanks for the pep talk." Nick slowly began using it, only his right hand to pull himself towards one bare, brittle branch at the next. Hardly stirring, the kitten was nuzzled in the crook of his other arm. Purposely, Nick didn't look up at the powerful cat who was watching every step of his ascent. But occasionally he glanced towards where Marta stood, guard at the base of the tree. Although it was weird seeing his friend holding Twilly's rifle, Nick felt accountably secure. For no particular reason, he was confident that Marta would know how to handle the gun if necessary. And she did. He was halfway up the dead pine, at least 30 feet on the ground, and when he heard her shout, "Stop or I'll shoot." "Stop right there." Alarmed, Nick craned his neck to see what was happening below. As he shifted his weight, the branch beneath him snapped off and began dropping straight down feet first as if he were in a runaway elevator. It all happened in a dizzying wisp of a second. Nick's right sleeve snagged on something, another jagged branch, and then he heard a sickening crack. A bolt of blinding pain shot from his wrist to the core of his brain, and then a wave of frozen blackness crashed over him. He experienced the sensation of twirling slowly in midair like a circus acrobat. When he opened his eyes, he realized that he was dangling from a broken arm and that very soon he was going to pass out. His chest was on fire and from hot stinging needles. It was the panther cub digging the claws into Nick's skin to hang on. He ran away. He's gone, Marta crowded triumphantly. Who? Nick rasped. Some guy wrapped in bandages. I scared him off. Then she looked into the tree and saw Nick swinging. What in the world are you doing? What does it look like I'm doing? You're going to fall and kill yourself. The possibility had occurred already to Nick. Reaching out with his good arm and his left arm, the same arm he had been training with and building for weeks, he grabbed the branch from which he was dangling. He began pulling himself up, pulling up with all of his strength, pulling in spite of the worst pain he had ever felt or ever had imagined feeling, pulling even with the terrified wild panther cub attached as like a cactus to his flesh, yowling and spitting in his face. Pulling and pulling until he completely was basically doing a one-handed chin-up, no problem. Nick suspended himself in the grueling pose long enough to unsnag his sleeve with his teeth. His damaged arm flopped useless at its side. The elbow was bent at a very peculiar angle. An instant later, by some small miracle, his feet hit a toe hold for support. It was a desert woodpecker nest in a baseball-sized hole in a weathered knob of a tree. Marta called, I'm climbing up. No, Nick said, because the mother panther was climbing down. Nick could see her silhouetted against the fog, moving closer. The animal easily weighed more than 100 pounds, yet she darted from limb to limb as if she were light as a sparrow. There was nothing for Nick to do but catch his breath and wait for the cub's cry to draw the cat nearer. He supposed he shouldn't have been scared, but instead he felt oddly at ease. The panther was elegant and agile and ghostly, mesmerizing to watch. Although Nick had seen many panther photographs in books and magazines, he found himself in a state of dreamy amazement. The scorching pain in his fractured arm had all but disappeared, causing him to wonder if he was slipping into shock. Soon the mother cat was only a few yards away, coiled on a heavy Y-shaped branch directly above Nick's head. Her ears flattened, her nose quivered, and her bright eyes fixed with fierce intensity on the noise bundle that had tacked it to the front of Nick's shirt. He knew the panther must be wondering why there was only one cub crying, wondering what had happened to her other one. Nick heard the deep rolling prelude of the growl that couldn't possibly be coming from a pint-sized kitten, and he knew that time had come. Even with both shoes wedged on a woodpecker hole, he teetered and swayed as he struggled to unfasten the frightened baby from his chest. The little cat was now squalling loudly with evidence of fright. Nick worried the mother would soon pounce on him in defense of the offspring. Marta must have had the same concern. She braced herself against the tree to steady Twilly's rifle, which she was pointing squarely at the adult cat. Nick raised one eye to see the big panther and very gently said, It's all right, I'm not going to hurt your little guy. The panther blinked and her ears perked. The cub let go of Nick's shirt and ever so carefully he placed it on the trunk of the tree. Its hooked claws dug into the crisp bark, and with a mighty yelp, the kitten attempted to climb. Immediately, the adult panther raised up, and distinctively soft rumble came from her throat. Nick knew what he had done, what had to be done now. As long as he remained in the tree, the mother cat would likely hold her distance away from the baby. It was an easy envision, inexperienced kitten losing its grip, falling before it reached the Y-shaped branch. So Nick looked down and picked out a landing. Don't do it, Marta shouted. Stand clear, he said, and with his good strong arm, he pushed himself away from the trunk of the tree. This time, luckily, he struck no branches on the way down. He landed on his back in a mound of pine straw. The last thing he remembered seeing before blacking out was the panther outstretched in mid-leap crossing to another tree. She was toting her cub by the scruff of its neck. Drake McBride tried to make up for all the rotten things he had said about Horace. You're a good dog, he shouted down from the tree. But Horace didn't budge. Horace continued to bark and howl. Flecks of foamy spittle flew from the bloodhound's large jaws. Drake McBride was afraid to climb down because Horace looked positively crazed and furious. like nothing the lazy mutt that the dog handler had brought to his hotel suite. Horace was totally wired. Horace wasn't budging from the base of the cypress tree, which he had chased the president of the Red Diamond Energy Corporation. It was the second jarring interruption of Drake McBride's escape. The first had occurred when he had stumbled into a clearing that had come face to face with a skinny Cuban girl holding a serious large rifle. She had vowed to shoot if she took another step, and she seemed serious about it. So he had turned and fled and kept on running until the bloodhound caught his scent and treated him like a dumb possum. "Good boy," hollered Drake McBride from the 19th time. "Ow!" replied Horace. This time it went on for 2 hours until suddenly the dog wheeled around, fell silent, and began wagging his tail. Momentarily, Horace was joined at the foot of the tree by a shirtless man wearing a knit ski beanie, wraparound shades, and an ammunition belt. Drake McBride figured the man was a poacher, not that he cared. "Help me, bro," he begged. "Come down from there," the stranger said. "What about the dog?" "Hurry up, I don't have all day." Timidly, Drake McBride made his way to the ground. He was relieved to see the bloodhound was now occupied with a bag of hamburgers. "I can't believe I paid $5,000 for that wacko dog," Drake McBride said to the stranger, "'cause they said he got ate by a panther. I wish he had." "You want him back?" "After he chased me up a tree, I don't think so." The man seemed amused. "I guess Horace got bored and chewed through his rope." Drake McBride rattled. "How do you know his name?" "Oh, Horace and I go way back. Who are you?" "I'm Drake W. McBride." "Well, how about that for luck?" Drake McBride stuck out his right hand and the stranger did not shake it, though he was smiling very big. "You know who I am?" Drake McBride asked with a surprise and a creeping sense of dread. The man said, "Yeah, you're the boss of the two-bit oil company that's drilling an illegal well in the state wildlife preserve. Or should I say, was drilling." Drake McBride dejectedly wondered how much worse his day could possibly get. "And who are you?" he asked in a hollow voice. "I'm the one who called the Fish and Wildlife agents about the panther. And I also glued your man Melton to a tree and sprayed him orange and gutted his truck and ripped off the load of pipes. I'm the one who's going to shut you down." The stranger took out his cell phone and dialed the number. "The fog's lifting. Get the chopper up and come out here right away," he instructed someone on the other end. Drake McBride considered making a dash for his freedom, but he knew he'd only get himself more lost than he already was. Besides, it would be easy for the athletic-looking stranger to outrun his chunky, out-of-shape, fractured rib self. "I'll give you $5,000 to forget all about this and let me go," Drake McBride said. The stranger laughed so sharply that Horace looked up from the munched remains of his quarter-pounders. "That doesn't sound... You remind me of my old man," the man said to Drake McBride. "That doesn't sound like a compliment." "It's not." "Then how about 10,000? The stranger grew serious and swatted a fly on his neck. "Mr. McBride, I'll let you go for free," he said. "But there's not enough money in the world to make me forget what you did here. 20,000 if I can hitch a ride back to town or your helicopter. 20,000 cash. Sorry, man, the chopper's full." "Now wait." "Come on, Horace." The stranger jogged off into the Blackvine swamp, the bloodhound loping at his heels. "Hey, where are you going?" Drake McBride shouted after him. "What about me? How do I get out of here?" End of chapter 26. Only one chapter left now to go.